I had a few crab cakes left over from a crab place order I had placed a while ago, and I wanted to come up with a recipe for these crab cakes that didn't quite require me using the crab cakes as crab cakes. So I plugged in my request into ChatGPT and asked it to come up with a crab dip recipe I could use using just the two crab cakes that I had left over. So as it was spitting out the recipe, I went ahead and took out the crab cakes I had left over so I can set them in the fridge to defrost for a while. Knowing that this whole crab dip situation was completely experimental, I didn't have my hopes up too high for how it would taste, so I just went with the flow, got the ingredients like it had told me, and went with the process of making the crab dip. The ingredients ChatGPT had me get were not unusual and were pretty typical to a normal crab dip you would see coming from Maryland. The only thing that was different for me was the fact that it called for white sharp cheddar cheese instead of regular yellow cheddar cheese. But hey, still going with the flow, we're going to make this exactly how ChatGPT had suggested. So while I'm making this crab dip using crab place crab cakes, I want to give you a story time as to how I was introduced to the crab place crab cakes for the first time. So as you may or may not know, my husband and our family owns the crab place. The crab place actually ships food to your door and is not a restaurant, but attached to our building we have a restaurant that we use to actually run the crab and cruise events that we do during the summer. What this means is that about 20 days out of the year, we use our kitchen to run these events. The rest of the days of the year, the kitchen sits idle and is not being used at all. So one year in particular, we decided to rent out our restaurant to a restaurateur just to see how things go. From time to time, my husband and I would drop into the restaurant and have a seat and have a bite to eat. Every time I go in there, I get something simple, just sticking to what I know and not really exploring the menu. Well, one evening in particular, there was something on the menu that caught my eyes. On the menu, there was an option to buy 2-ounce crab cake balls, and I figured, well, I'm not that hungry, I'll try that. So I ordered the 2-ounce crab cake balls, and they brought them out to me on a little tray, and there was only about 2 of them. I was a little disappointed because even though I wasn't hungry, I was a little sad to see that there was only 2 of them. And because they were 2 ounces, I just knew they were not going to fill me up. But anyway, I bit into these crab balls, and when I tell you it stopped me in my tracks, it was to the point where I nudged my husband while I was in mid-chew and said, "Oh my God, you have to try this." He took the other half of the crab ball that I had in my hand, and before he even put it in his mouth, he said, "You know these are crab place crab cakes, right?" My mind was completely blown because I had never tried crab place crab cakes before. Crab cakes have never really been my thing, so I was never really interested in trying it, and I never really had anything against it. I just never had a reason to give it a try. But here I was on this random weekday trying these crab cakes for the first time and realizing that the crab place had such a fantastic product. I literally just blind taste tested my own product. When I tell you I was so proud of our product that I now tell this story every single time someone asks me, "Are the crab place crab cakes any good?" My natural reaction to those crab cakes made it easy for me to make that the go-to story to tell people whoever asked me about them. So now that I had 2 extra crab cakes sitting in my freezer, I just knew I wanted to do something spectacular with them. And because I've been dabbling with ChatGPT, I just knew I wanted to ask it to make me a crab dip out of those crab cakes just to see what it could do and if it would be any good. I really love trying out new recipes and testing the limits with our products. What made this whole experience a little bit better for me was the fact that I didn't have to go scouring the internet for a recipe. All I had to do was tell ChatGPT the inspiration I had and the ingredients I wanted to use, and it made it happen. And this crab dip recipe it generated using 2 crab place crab cakes was actually pretty decent. There are so many crab dip recipes out there that are similar with the yellow cheese that I thought it took a really unique spin by using the white cheddar cheese on this. I've actually never seen a crab dip recipe that required white cheddar cheese, so I was actually excited to try it. And once I popped it in the oven and got it to brown, it actually looked like a regular crab dip. I honestly think the best crab dips are made by native Marylanders, so we're going to see if ChatGPT really came through and did his big one with this recipe. While it does look good and while it does smell good, let's see if it tastes good. We're going to try it with some homemade butter toast I made and rate it 1 through 10. And after tasting ChatGPT's recipe, I give it a good 6.5 to a 7 out of 10, simply because there's more filler than I would like. It's way too creamy. I would actually prefer for it to have more crab than anything, and if it did, it would be a solid 8.
I don't have to find an aesthetic. I am an aesthetic. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody out here right now who's going into Pinterest trying to type up all these adjectives to describe me.